The first part of my life was probably about dealing with wounding and sorting out who was at fault. Is it my parents? Is it me? Is it the institutions? Where did this car crash happen? But then over time, realizing that I'm not defined just by that narrative, that there's other parts of my narrative that are full of life. It's like a tree. There's a couple branches that kind of got decrepit, but there's other things that are shooting out fruit and shooting out life. And it's like, choose life.
Hello, my name is Wing, and welcome to A Work in Purpose. Do you see people who are living their purpose and wondering how did they get there? Are you wondering what is your purpose too? Me too. That is why I am inviting you to join me on this journey. A Work in Purpose is our podcast for igniting and reaching our purpose together. On most weeks, I'll be sharing a podcast episode of me interviewing people from all walks of life who are working towards some kind of purpose, whether it is with their career, volunteering, creativity, spiritual practices, or just how they approach everyday life. We'll dive deep into their stories to uncover what obstacles they had to overcome to get to where they are today. By hearing their stories, I hope you will learn from their journey and be inspired so you too can become a work in purpose. And please subscribe to this podcast, join our Facebook group, A Work in Purpose, and follow us on Instagram for your doses of inspirations. Now, are you concerned about whether you will ever find your purpose? Well, don't be. Eventually, you will find yours too, just as our guest, Malia Mckinney, did in her 60s. As it was expected at the time, Malia spent 30 plus years of her career working in corporations in the hospitality industry as a sales and marketing leader. Towards the end of her long career, however, she had this deep realization that what she was doing was no longer fulfilling nor purposeful, and that voice only got louder. She then began volunteering for an organization that provides services to those shunned by society, where she had a pivotal awakening moment to her true, bigger purpose. Since that moment, she went through a very challenging transition from her corporate self to her now purposeful self, and she has never been happier. In this episode, we discuss what Malia's current purpose is and the practice she is sharing to bring more joy and love into people's lives. How Malia leaned into a Christian faith to gain the clarity and impetus to live her purpose. How she transitioned from a high-paying corporate career to one that relies on the generosity of others. And we had a deep, fascinating conversation about the differences between faith and religion, the concept of God, and the importance of having a community to help you reach your purpose. Hello, Malia Mckinney. Thank you for joining A Work
Hello.
in Purpose. How's your day going?
Hi, Wing. It's going great. I'm really excited to be with you.
Great. So, the purpose of this show is to help others figure out what their purpose is and to reach theirs. So, for you, where would you say you are at on your journey towards your purpose? Have you discovered it? Have you reached it? Are you living it? What would you say?
Wow, what a great question. I feel like my purpose is emerging. And I used to think it was one thing, and then I thought it was something else, but I'm really feeling a very positive momentum. And I'm feeling connected to my purpose in a way that I've never felt before.
Mm,
And that has happened, strangely enough, by giving away or giving up some of the things I thought I was and really zero basing and starting over and saying, who really am I?
mhm,
And in that, I'm finding a joy in discovery and also sharing this and interacting with other people so that it can be part of a collaborative thing rather than just a solo sport.
mm. So, what would you say is that emerging purpose that you touched upon?
I feel like being kind of empathetic and knowing people are going through rough times right now, especially. And there are a lot of people that are feeling disconnected and feeling despair. Anxiety and depression are just rampant right now. And a lot of that, I think, is sociological and part of our culture. But what I have found is that helping people connect with their faith and their spirituality, and also giving them really tangible and practical ways for healing
Mhm,
that come from intimacy rather than knowledge. And it's a prayer modality that I've been practicing for about the last 6 years. And the more I do it, the more joy it brings me and the more I want to share it with other people.
Mm,
So I feel like my current purpose is tied to sharing what I've been given and sharing encouragement and sharing hope with people.
nice. What kind of prayer modality is it?
Well, it's called Emmanuel Prayer.
Hmm.
So it is based on a Christian prayer worldview. And the premise is that God is with us. So, unlike things that feel very religious, and yes, I think rules are great and disciplines are great, but this is really about encountering God in a way that's supportive and loving. And I think some people who've been brought up in faith or maybe outside of faith, watching it from the outside, felt that God was distant, God was unhappy, God was a perfectionist, and there's nothing we could do to ever live up to those expectations. And Emmanuel prayer is really different from that. It's really about experiencing the kindness of God and Him as a person, Jesus as a person, and not just a deity. And I hope that that doesn't sound heretical to people who are in a different camp or crazy to people who aren't in a faith based camp. But I can tell you that the result of it is people feel more joyful and people feel more love. And I feel like that can be the greatest purpose ever. If we can experience more love of self and love of others, that would make this life so much more worth living.
Mm. So, can you tell us more about how you practice this prayer? Do you currently leading other people to this prayer, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so it started out where we hosted a teacher who's an expert in this prayer about 6 years ago, and we had about 40 people there, and we all listened to it, and I thought, "Well, that's awesome." But I felt a little bit like keep it at arm's distance because I didn't really know that much about it, and then I tried it, and I thought, "Well, that was awesome," but then I put it back at arm's distance thinking, "Yeah, okay, I'll try that when I get my act together, or when I get my life together, or when I'm a better person." But what I found is gradually by doing this type of prayer and receiving it, it started healing some really old stuff that was part of my narrative from
Mm,
growing up.
mm,
And it was just like barnacles were coming off and old wounds were getting healed. And the more I did it, the more I was able to be actually loving myself because people wouldn't have suspected it, but I had feelings of inadequacy and feelings of shame and things that were based on my story. And over time, I started feeling that doesn't hurt as much anymore. And it started feeling better and better. And I think that was my incentive of really wanting to bring other people into it is as I started feeling more joy and I realized that this is something I can easily share because it's not really complicated. It's actually very simple and it's very a lay person. It's for lay people. It's not for like fancy psychologists, which are awesome. It's not for psychiatrists. It's for just people, friends to be able to do this together.
mm. What's the
And
gist of
that
it?
basically, there's 4 let's see. Well, I could teach on this for, like, a lifetime because I love it so much, so I don't wanna get too granular, but it's based on the idea that, by having a positive memory and reliving a positive memory, and then expressing appreciation for God from that memory, then being able to connect with God from that positive place, and then just asking God, "What's on your heart for me?" So it sounds very simple, but it actually has brain science behind it because it was developed by a psychiatrist and a neurotheologian, if you could believe that.
Hmm.
Where interesting that the Bible and science, psychiatry, everything we know about the brain, it all supports this belief that when our relational circuits are on, we can access the good, we can access joy. When our relational circuits are off, we are in enemy mode and we are guarded and we aren't able to really love one another. So it's really putting the brain science behind biblical biblical tradition, let's say, but it's experiential. So it's something that a person can experience and really feel love. That's just the best ever.
That sounds amazing. So, how do you practice this? Do you have to gather as a group, or how does it work?
Good question. Good question. It's there's two ways. One of it is you could kind of think of it as like a lifestyle. So it can be done individually, where when I am going through my day and I'm thinking, God is with me. That's why it's called Emmanuel, because Emmanuel, the name Emmanuel means God with us. Simple, God with us. So let's say I'm going to a business meeting, which I had plenty of, and I'm nervous, which I used to be, and I'm worried, but then I can just actually get a sense of God being with me in that meeting and being looking at him and just being like, I know you're with me, I know you love me. And that gives me a sense of calm, and it gives me a sense of all my faculties. I can actually be present rather than being freaked out and being, anxious. So it can be done as a lifestyle, where each day I can be like, when I'm trying to get things done, saying, okay, God, I know you're with me, you're empowering me, you love me, coming from that place of security, secure attachment. So, but really how it's practiced and what I teach and what I do as a practitioner is that it's a one-on-one where I'm coaching another person to have this experience. And the funnest thing about it, I don't even know if funnest is a word, but I like to use it, is that I'm not telling the other person what to think or what to envision or what to feel. I'm only there along the journey with them and encouraging them to hear for themselves what God is saying to them. And that's what's so revolutionary about it, as opposed to someone else praying for someone. I think this, I think that, God's going to do this and that. Somebody else. It's actually the person hearing from God. And most of the time, when they ask God, what's on your heart, almost 90% of the time, the first thing out of his mouth is, I love you. Like, most people are not going around thinking that God's loving them all the time. So that's what's really refreshing about it, is that God is very surprising. And he says things that we're not expecting, especially when we feel down, when we don't love ourselves. So it's how it works is I'm would be the coach, guiding the other person to experience it, but it's not creative visualization. It's not me planting, oh, picture him by the river, or picture him saying this to you. It's actually picture him with you. And now, what do you want me to know? And then the person just experiences God in that way. I'm afraid people are going to have a freak out about this, because this is happening all over the world, by the way. There are practitioners in countries all over the world, and they're doing it the exact same way. So this isn't something that I made up. This is something that I've learned and studied. I'm actually been trained in advanced technique, and I'm a certified presenter, and I'm a certified coach. And there's a lot of rigor involved in making sure that this is done safely, because a lot of people have been even abused by churches and pastors, no offense to pastors, and religious people, and all of these people have, a lot of them have suffered church wounds and wounding. And this is like, oh, people have to be careful. But this we consider is the safest way for someone to enjoy and experience God.
So humans often personify the concept of God as a person. How do you see the concept of God?
Yeah, great question. We tend to personify because we can't help it, because we're persons. So we envision God as being a person. And I think what I've experienced from God is this mystery. Because according to like the kind of the Christian worldview, which is the world, there's lots of other worldviews that are awesome, but that God is three. There's a trinity. And the thing that's cool about that is that all of the different aspects of God can be included in something mysterious. So there's this Holy Spirit that's just wild, that is the source of all creativity and all communication and all brilliant ideas. And then there's Jesus as a person who walked the face of the earth. He was a historical person, but he is now a spirit. So all the things he stood for as a person, which was being kind and justice and all of that, still exists. And then there's God the Father, who is the creator. But if it were just one, that would be really limited. But if it's three, it kind of covers the whole spectrum of things that we don't understand, things that we can't see, things that are in the spirit, things that are beyond our human comprehension, and yet things that are really personal. So it's kind of big and small at the same time. And I feel as a human that we should have a God that's beyond description. We should have a God that's out there and wild, but we also should have a God that's personal. And a person could say, well, maybe you created God in your own image. And I'd be like, well, that'd be great. If that happened, I won't know until I die. But because I hear him and I see him with other people too, it's built my faith. So I'm like, this is something that's so good that even a person who doesn't have a lot of faith, you start seeing him and hearing him enough, it kind of builds your faith. So that's kind of how I look at it. I hope that was an adequate answer
Yeah, no,
for
that's
now.
I think that is a beautiful answer. So I've been studying a lot about spirituality and New Age thought recently, and what you've been describing sounds a lot like meditation, the prayer that you are teaching. Do you see them as being the same thing?
I think meditation is phenomenal. And I've recently discovered, I think the layperson, just common person, just everyday, American especially, when we think of meditation, we may think of transcendental meditation, which was kind of borrowed from the Eastern practices, which came like the 60s, along with the Beatles. Um, but meditation, the Christian mystics were doing crazy meditation way before. Oh, maybe not before, because I don't know when. Maybe the other type of meditation is much older. But meditation's been going on in all different forms, in all different traditions. So that's one of the greatest things, that meditation is a way for us to quiet ourselves, get out of our own way, and access the great I am, the great being, whatever that is. So I think meditation is key. The difference with this practice is very specific because it's based on the person of Jesus. And so therefore it's going to be best suited for believers in Jesus, people who believe that Jesus is God. However, I think in parts of my heart, I think that it could be adopted or adapted to people who just believe that there's a higher power or they believe that there is something greater. I'm not an expert on how to do that because I'm really speaking mostly to Jesus followers. But this practice has been brought to people that are not Jesus followers. And if you think about like the whole 12-step tradition, it's all based on a power greater than ourselves. So I'm not an expert in how far from it for how this could be applied, but I do believe that all of us are created. I believe in God, and I believe that we were created in the image of God. And I believe that we have the ability to reach God and to be reached by God. And that, I think, gives me hope for people of all different traditions, is that's one thing we have in common. And I think hope is another key that we have in common too, because our access to God and his access to us, or her access to us, whatever your belief is, there's more to this life. It just transcends our everyday experience and it gives voice to things that we know and see that we can't really fit into our everyday shoebox. So that might have been a crazy answer, but
What would you say is like the truth that resides in every one of us that people are shutting out because they could be shutting out a spiritual side of them or connection
mhm,
with, God or a greater entity? What do you think that
yeah,
in the truth is?
yeah, that I think that's very applicable. And some people are shutting it out because they have been wounded, like I say, or whatever faith they tried on as a jacket was too small and it was too restrictive and it was misogynistic and it was, whatever, white or whatever it was. But so those things are too small and we should take those off. We should get those off of us. But I do also think that we live in a society, and I'm not just talking about our country, but a modern society that is, it's a postmodern that was based after the Enlightenment. Anything that was religion meant ignorant, it meant stupid, it meant uneducated, and it was against science. And unfortunately, we've had a backlash in our country of what we call white evangelicals that are really giving faith, in my opinion. I'm going to get hate mail, but giving the love of God and the love of each other kind of a bad name. But that has happened throughout history always, that there's always been factions of people who have gone to extreme. And I'm not talking about, the current extremism. I'm talking about the Crusades. I'm talking about the people who came and established the missions and wiped out the indigenous populations, and also US imperialism and, UK imperialism, all sorts of that has always happened where people have gotten extreme and then have gone against one another. And religion is blamed for that. And it's been used as a weapon and a tool against people. But when we clear that away and we say, well, that's the result of our brokenness. That is a result of our brokenness, but we can't fix that. I don't believe we can fix that brokenness on our own. I believe that God can help us in our brokenness because I don't believe that we were created broken. I believe that when we were thought of by the great genius of the universe, he did not say, "Oh, I'm going to create a bunch of broken people that hate each other and murder each other." I don't believe that at all. I do believe that there was some type of terrible catastrophe. I believe that we have pride and sin and there's evil in the world. It's true. But I do think that this is a great battle that has already been won. And that's where the Jesus part comes in, is the belief that Jesus overcame sin and death. And in that, we can have a way of being better than the broken world. And in that, we can help make the world better. It's not to have a little enclave of people just like me. It's how can we bring this love to people who need it? Everyone needs it.
Hmm.
There's nobody excluded from this, whether they believe as we do or not. And that's pretty much my heart.
Great. So, what would you say after the backlash is overcome and clarity is brought back, and there's an inner truth that kind of exposes itself? What would you say that inner truth is that's common across humanity that needs to be rediscovered?
I think I'm so glad you asked that. I was giving this some thought because I was reflecting back on a time in my life where I worked with a nonprofit. It's called Because Justice Matters. And I had spent 30 years in the hotel world as an executive, six-figure income, expensive suits. And I left that and I went and worked with the poor, the poorest of the poor women, many who are addicted, many who are sex workers in the Tenderloin, which is a very difficult neighborhood, as you know, in San Francisco. And what drew me there was when I looked at the face, it's all women that we serve, no offense to the men, but they've got other services and they need different things than women do. The women on the street hide. There's like a whole system that's very, very painful for them. And a lot of them use sex to be able to live. And I'm not talking about fancy prostitutes, I'm talking about things that are really, really heartbreaking. And so what happened was I started seeing these women as me. And I started realizing that I had shut them out, thinking, oh, I got my concern over here. I got my hotel world. I got my fancy suits. I got my family. I got mine. And I started realizing they weren't any different from me, but something bad had happened to them, or something like a lot of them have had catastrophe. A lot of them have been abused. A lot of them have been victims of violence. And when I started seeing them, and you hear that expression that says, I think it says, there, but for the grace of God go I started realizing that the ego that I had built up about who I am, the identity that I'd built up about who I am, it was false. It was based on my security. It was based on my financial security. But what if I got an illness and I lost everything? And what if I couldn't get a job and all of these things? And so I realized that these women were made in the image of God and that I was no different from them and no better than them. And so it started making me see the people around me as people of value. And I wanted to know them. I wanted them to know me. And I was afraid. I was thinking they were going to say, who are you? We can't use you. You're not a social worker. You're nothing. But I found out all they wanted was someone to look them in the face and be kind to them. And when I started operating in that, I realized that that is the way the world is transformed, is looking at the other person not as the enemy or not as what can you do for me? What can I exploit? But looking at each other with compassion and looking at each other as a brother or a sister. And I know that sounds insane, but it really is a worldview that we can operate in that. And then when we do have a problem, when we do have a disagreement, to be able to come back together and not just write the other person off as other. And I think smarter people than me, like, people, there's this guy named Richard Rohr. Everyone loves Richard Rohr. He's like this modern theologian guy. But somebody, maybe it was Richard Rohr, maybe it wasn't, talked about, like, I think they say thee and thou, or I don't know what the word is, but like you and I, there's me and there's you. And it's like the space between us, like really focusing on you're right in front of me. You're important to me. You're not an object. You're not a means to an end. And there's some type of holiness that comes from seeing each other with dignity and seeing each other. So if we fall apart, if we come, against each other, how do we get restored? How do we get restored? And I feel like that is kind of like the next frontier. And
Mm,
that's also the next frontier for our country right now. Is that when we came apart, how do we come back together? Even if we have differences. It's a mystery right now. I don't have the answer, but I am feeling like this is an invitation.
mhm.
And I think that faith is a foundation for that, but not religion. So I'm kind of differentiating religion from faith.
At what point did you realize that the barrier that exists between you and those women was kind of an artificial,
Mm,
ego-minded barrier? And was that something you slowly realized, or did you have some sort of experience that made you realize,
wow.
wow, we are really connected?
I can't believe that you asked that because there was an experience that happened. And it's really pretty crazy. And I'll try to explain it in the best way I can. So, when I was with Because Justice Matters, I was involved as a volunteer in this thing called Nail Day. And every time I think of Nail Day, I just feel like I'm just going to burst with joy because what we would do is we'd set up the space, and it started in, oh, I can't remember what year it started, I think 2010, but it's been happening for a long time. And so we set up this beautiful space and we would have volunteers come and do manicures for the ladies that came in. And we would serve them cookies and we'd make awesome coffee and we would make a space for art. So if they were like from the street, they would be able to sit down and do art with people and really peaceful. We had a game table for crazy loud games for some people who love to be loud and play games. And we had other like gentle things that were happening throughout the room. And we would do this every month. We used to do it every week, then we did it every month. And women would come in, some of them would still be drunk, some of them would be on some other type of substance, some of them were in prostitution, some of them like we couldn't do their nails because their hands were so dirty, we'd have to soak their fingers for them and but we would always show dignity and love towards them. So this one gal came in and she was on a walker and she had a wig that was like not on straight. She had leopard pants on. She was missing many teeth and she was hunched over. And I was like, whoa, like I was new to do that. It was like probably my first time I went to volunteer. And I was thinking, how do I relate to her? Like, how do I meet that bridge? How do we make that bridge between us? Because her life experience and her life right now is so different from who I am. And how's she going to love me? And how am I going to love her? So anyway, I did the best I could, and did nails and brought people coffee and stuff because I got that hospitality thing. So anyway, I the next morning I kept thinking about these women, the ones that didn't have a place to go, the ones who were in the cold, the ones that were too dirty to even have their nails done. The one she was on a walker, she's so vulnerable, she could be knocked over like in a second, little old lady. And that next morning, I kept thinking about them at night, like, what about these women? What about these women? What about these women? I was upset. I didn't know what to do. So this is where the supernatural thing happened. So I was in a little quiet time, a little meditation time, and I saw these crystal or plastic compartments. And it was faith, family, fitness, finance. Now it all starts with F. But anyway, all friendship, like all these nice little compartments. And I realized that I had compartmentalized my life into all these nice little boxes. So now I'm doing volunteer work. Oh, and now I'm doing family. Oh, and now I'm working on my finances, right? So I'm doing all this stuff in compartments. And I saw Jesus and I saw this woman in my spirit. I saw them in the room where I was with her little walker. And she drooled, by the way, unfortunate. But she did love to sing. So she has a beautiful voice. But anyway, I saw her. I'm not going to use her name. And I saw Jesus standing there. And I'm like, holy smokes, uh-oh. Because I don't normally just see Jesus show up. It's like, uh-oh. But I was crying out in my heart, like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so I see him there and I'm like, uh-oh. And he says to me, she doesn't fit in a compartment, and neither do I. And I was undone. And I started to cry. And it's like, I am sorry, God, that I wanted to put you in a little crystal box. Oh, you're in the faith box. Jesus, you fit in here. And he's like, she doesn't fit in here, and neither do I. And I was like, oh my God, I'm living in compartments. And I was ashamed and embarrassed. But what I realized was that even getting to know these women and their stories, they were not objects. They were not to be put in a box. And so I made my mission when I worked at that organization to tell their stories, but in a way that would build a bridge so that a volunteer who was probably well heeled and working at Salesforce and, would spending $100 on a brunch, sorry about that, not trying to be mean, but that they would be able to come and paint people's nails. And I would tell them the story that this is who we are. We're women. We love one another. We're not that different. And if I could bridge that gap, you can bridge that gap. And so that was part of my message to especially church ladies, church young women. Be like, come, come have coffee, sit across from them, hear their story, like love them, get to know their name. And that is what 4.5 years was my life, basically. Like, I couldn't wait till nail day. I'd be like, oh, I gotta go to nail day. It's my favorite thing in the world. But we had to stop nail day because of COVID. And that was one of the big tragedies was we had to stop. And then I was like, how can I live with that? But what happened is other organizations who could provide showers and hot meals and things that the women really needed, they didn't need a manicure as much as they needed a shower or they needed a vaccine or they needed something to help them. The pandemic really took a terrible toll on the community in the Tenderloin. Not so much the disease itself, but the isolation. So
Mm.
we had to take a step back from that, but other people stepped forward. So it wasn't that they were abandoned, but there will be a time for manicures again. But right now we're still dealing with financial support and tangible help for people. So anyway, that's my nail day story. But that was the revelation that convicted me to come out of my previous worldview that was all safe and step out into the unknown.
Oh, that's very powerful. So now that
Thank
you've
you.
stepped out into the unknown, how have you changed and how do you live your life differently now?
Yeah, thank you for asking and thank you for caring. So, if I look at my life kind of like in three acts. So, the first one was the 30 years as a hotel executive. And then I went to Because Justice Matters, left everything, and just said, I'll work for free. And then I became a missionary because I was working for free. So, I had to like survive. But then what's happened is the mission is still important. But I started seeing that there are millions of people that are alienated. There are millions of women, especially. I mostly pray with women that feel bad about themselves, that feel they have a negative idea about God. They feel lonely. And so in a way, it's almost like my story of my own journey empowered me to be able to be with other people in their journey, whatever their journey is, and to be able to give them encouragement where they are, not put a bow on it, but just to be with them in their pain. And I think working with the women in the Tenderloin, especially, I kind of realized that I have the capacity for empathy and I have the capacity to be with another person in their pain. And I almost feel like there's been a shift to realizing that there's people are all around me that are living in alienation or they're living in they just aren't feeling that joy. And so this prayer Emmanuel prayer is a way that everybody can come into a greater sense of joy and humanity. So it's been a hard transition because I didn't really want to leave the organization because I love it so much and I'm still involved. And now I can support them and I can, continue to spread the word about Because Justice Matters. But they blessed me to go out and do this type of prayer because they said, we see this as a gift that you have, this unique gifting that you have to spread this good news, to spread this joy. And they actually sent me forth. And there are other volunteers that can step forward and do the other tactical work. But it was more like they released me to be able to do this full time as a missionary. And that's essentially starting last fall, I transitioned into doing this full time. And it's really interesting because there's like a handful of people that say they want to support me to do this. And I probably do maybe 20 to 30 prayer sessions a week. And I'm teaching and I'm trying to share, raise up other coaches so we can do this and we can multiply. And there's people doing this all over the country. And it really is just kind of like part of a movement, is kind of how I look at it.
Right? So, as you know, the Tenderloin is one of the most challenging parts of San Francisco, if not even the whole country. How did you first feel compelled to make an impact in the Tenderloin specifically? What was your first experience like?
Mhm. Yeah, well, it's a great question. So the organization, Because Justice Matters, is focused on the Tenderloin, and they have been there since 2000, I think 2008. So I was able to come into a community that was already there and already serving, and all women, women run, women led. I was going to say badass women, but in the Tenderloin, knowing the people, knowing their names, knowing their stories, knowing the women, and I came in and was suddenly in their group. So they helped me belong because I never could have done it by myself. And that's one of the advantages of these nonprofits, is that they have the connections with the locals and they're their boots on the ground. So anyway, I was able to come into the fold of the culture of Because Justice Matters. But when I first got there, I did feel very out of place just that first time especially. But then I realized that people just want to be loved, and they just want someone to be kind to them. They just want to be seen. Now, that's not saying that there aren't needs like showers and food and medical. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying I can't provide all those other things, but I can give what I have, which is my full face, my full heart, my full attention, and my compassion. And some of the women I still work with, that I help them with some logistics. Because if someone's giving them a hard time and they can't get through, I'll be like, "Give me the number." And I can use some of my special communication skills to get through to the person that's blowing them off because they don't fit the profile, or somebody who's kind of giving them a hard time. So I sometimes I can use my big personality as being a champion for someone. And so I still have that connection. I wanted to mention that even though I left, I still have relationships with people there that are dealing with the Tenderloin every day. But there are some phenomenal organizations in the Tenderloin that are making a huge difference. Glide is one, YWAM is another, and those two, and also City Hope. Those are like phenomenal organizations that are anchored in the Tenderloin and making a difference for the long term.
Thank you for sharing that. So, I want to take a step back and get a fuller picture of who Malia is. Where did you grow up?
Oh, I was born in Hawaii. That's how I got the name Malia. And people would say, "Are you Hawaiian?" And I'd be like, "Do I look Hawaiian?" Because that'd be no. But we lived there. I lived there 5 years, and then we moved to California. So I lived in California my whole life since then, in the Bay Area. I didn't realize how exclusive and how privileged the Bay Area is until my friends were like, "You're so pretentious." And it's like, oh, because I was from Marin. We weren't wealthy, but I was from Marin, which is right here. And, there's a certain worldview that we have. I went to school at UC Davis, but the funny thing was I studied European history
Mhm.
from 1300 to 1800, which Davis isn't known for that, but it was wonderful because there'd be like 20 people in the class, and it would be the professor would be the person who wrote the textbook. Like you get direct access to like the thought leaders. So that was really, really a great experience. But I ended up getting into hospitality marketing and sales. I just kind of have that sales personality. I wanted to go on in academics, but that didn't work for me.
Mhm.
So I kind of got into the sales and marketing stream, and I was in that for 30 years. That's a long time.
What drew you into the hospitality industry?
Yeah, well, I had been on straight commission sales. So I'd sold computers, and that was weird. I could do it, but it was very I thought it would be rational, but it was very irrational. People made buying decisions in those days based on ego, and it was really kind of male. It was not a very healthy industry. So then I got into selling greeting cards. I thought, well, that would be super fun. So I sold stuffed animals and greeting cards, and that was actually really, really delightful. But I was on straight commission. So just the politics involved with your territories and commissions and all that is there's another side to it. So I figured hospitality would be perfect because there's always going to be people traveling and moving, and there's always going to be a need for lodging, and there's always going to need for meetings. So that was natural. I took a class in it. I loved it. And then I got into it, started as a sales manager, and then worked my way up to director of sales. But what's funny is that I got recruited. It was Holiday Inn at the time. Now it's Intercontinental Hotels Group. Okay. But in those days, it was Holiday Inn. And I got recruited because the person who recruited me said that Holiday Inn at the time was a leader in promoting women and minorities into management. And I was like, oh, I want that. So that was kind of the byline that got me into the Holiday Inn family. And I stayed with that brand pretty much most of my hotel career because it suited me and it wasn't pretentious. And it was, I thought we were helping people connect and bringing people all over the world into San Francisco. And there's an excitement about sharing places with people and sharing their stories. So it was really fulfilling from that standpoint. And I enjoyed the business pretty much.
Great. Did you feel like when you were in that industry that you were fulfilling some sort of purpose, or was there like a feeling of something that was lacking that you just realized?
That's a great question too. I was giving that some thought because really, I have to say, it's not that I don't like who I was in the olden days, but the brokenness aspect of it, like talking about ego and how important ego is. So, wanting to be part of something and then wanting to be good at something and then wanting to feel like I'm with other people doing something well and we're working for an ethical company that has good values. Like there's an idealism that I kind of, sprayed on like a patina on everything around me because I kind of live that way. And that was satisfying for a while. But then I started realizing that some of the things I was putting out there weren't really there. And that is kind of hard, when you realize that. Like, for example, there's like two stories. One is you've got to make the money for the owners and you've got to bring in the revenue. And that was my job. And that's virtuous. And then there's you've got to provide awesome hospitality for the people, but also for the employees and the housekeepers and love them. And so for me, the love factor was the most important thing of why I loved hospitality. And I feel like I could do the numbers and I could do the logistics and I could do the strategy. But really, over time, the love part became more and more important to me. And the other mission of brand and revenue became less satisfying to me. And it's certainly, I'm grateful for what the hotel business did for me. And there was so much of my identity that was formed being a director of sales and, the brand and all that. But really, over time, and it provided for my family. I was able to have financial stability and take care of people in my family. But over time, it didn't feel like enough purpose to it. And not to be ungrateful, but to say, gosh, it's not fulfilling in the same way. And that's when I started doing more volunteer work and realizing that that was more and more what was important to me. And then it became like a conflict because it did probably affect my work. It probably did affect my success. It probably did affect my effectiveness. But that's how transition happens, where you used to do something and then suddenly something else is calling you. And I was doing that with a passion, and the other just kind of faded as being less me. But it took time for that to happen. But there's always for me, there was pain in that transition because the business had been really good to me. But when I made that transition, it took probably a couple years for it to even get out of my system. And I always thought, well, maybe I'll go back. But over time, it's more like, this is what I'm meant to do. Thank God I still have some years left to do it. And I want to spend the rest of my life doing this. And that's really cool when you reach that in your life where It doesn't mean it's perfect, but you know where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do. And I have to say that came late in life, but and it's collaborative. It wasn't just done in a vacuum. It took other people saying, "We see this about you. We see this about you. We support you." And that's one thing I want to mention is the importance of community. That when I went to Because Justice Matters, it was this completely supportive, collaborative community where people treated each other with respect and everybody had a place at the table. And that was where I got rid of a lot of my weird shame issues and a lot of my family brokenness and my strangeness. I had to kind of deconstruct in order to be reconstructed. And thank God that happened because I think we find who we are in community. And that community was loving and supportive. And as a result of that, when they sent me on to do my next rendition with prayer, they're 100% for me and they believe in me and they're like, and so that's a great feeling. There's people that support me and believe in me. And it's not like I need their approval. It's more that people come alongside and say, I'm into what you're doing and I want to support you. How can I help you? How can I pray for you? It's like, whoa, it's not just the Malia show anymore. And I feel like my earlier life was all about me and what I could do. And now it's more about who I am and who's with me.
So you mentioned that you realized that what you were doing in hospitality wasn't really fulfilling your purpose towards the end of your career. So was there something that happened around that time that made you lean towards doing what Because Justice Matter is doing? Or
Mm.
what made you attracted to doing what they were doing? Was there something?
Yeah, good question. I think there's two questions there. One was the sorrow, the unhappiness started increasing. So I think that sometimes we think that unhappiness should be, medicated or ignored or whatever. But when unhappiness increases, it's something that we need to pay attention to. So even though I had this awesome job at this awesome company and awesome people that I worked with, I was less and less joyful about doing what I was doing. All right. And then it's almost like I almost think sometimes we create our own conflict in an environment where when we aren't adhering to the organization's values in the same way, there is some dissonance that happens. And I think that that started to happen towards the end, and it started being problematic for other people as well as for me. So I think that the company benefited by me leaving, and I benefited leaving too. And that was sad, but it was also, it just was like critical mass of this isn't really working for any of us. How do I make a transition? I didn't expect it, but it was like that. But how I picked Because Justice Matters is I thought about the two most amazing women that I had met in San Francisco that I admired, that I was like, if I could be like them, that would be amazing. And I don't mean do exactly what they do, but even be around them. And both of them worked at Because Justice Matters. So one of them was older, like me, and she was a therapist who gave up her practice to work in the Tenderloin and be with the women on the street. And the other one is Ruthie Kim, who's the founder of Because Justice Matters, and she's just this genius firebrand. And they're both total opposite personalities. If you were into Enneagram, like one of them is like caring and cuddly, and the other is like fierce, but they both are brilliant. And I met with each of them individually and I said, I'm thinking I just want to be doing what you're doing. And so they're like, yeah, okay, come do what we do. So that's how I got in because it was more like looking around and saying, who's influential in your life? Who is someone that you hold up and say, there's something happening here. I want to know more. And that's pretty much how I got in with them is like looking to these people and these leaders and being like, I can learn a lot from you. And the thing that was interesting was I had to strip myself to nothing to even come into that organization. I used to run a team, multi-million dollar marketing team. And next thing you know, I'm like feeling the stapler and thinking, I'm managing the staples today. And that was painful, but it was more like knowing that there was a bigger purpose and it was kind of being deconstructed and
Hmm,
being humble and being humble servant because you can't serve people if you think that you should be served. I
yeah, so
just made
true.
that up.
But given how San Francisco is so expensive, like how did you sustain yourself financially during that transitional period to
Oh, you're so
today?
smart. That's such a phenomenally great question. So it's really very funny. So I went from this six-figure income and I'm so rich and I'm so fancy. And there's this really cool song, I'm so fancy. I don't know, you probably know that. But anyway, to we ended up having an inheritance. And so unfortunately, a family member of my husband's side passed away and left us with like a nice inheritance. It was like 2 years of salary, right? And I just said, yeah, I'm not working. I've been the breadwinner since I was a child. I'm not working. Don't care. I'm working, but I don't care what I make. I'll work for free. And that was like a really radical choice. But part of it was a little bit of a rebellion to say, what do I need? What do I really need to work in the tenderloin? What do I really need? I need a pair of shoes that if you step on a hypodermic needle, it's not going to puncture. And I need a coat. And I need, like I need some t-shirts and I need some jeans. Like I'm just saying, like, what do I need? And anyway, so there was that. But also what happened was I used up my savings and we used up the inheritance. And then my husband said, "You know what? You're going to have to raise support. If you're going to work for free, you're going to have to raise support." And that's a model that in the Christian, mostly Christian organizations or nonprofits, you raise support. So you ask people around you to support you. And having been the rainmaker and bringing in money, to turn it upside down and be like, "Oh, I have no income and I need to ask people around me, do you believe in me? Would you support me?" That was so awkward that I almost died. I
Mm,
felt like I had ingested formaldehyde. I was like, I read books about it and I tried to do it and was too scared. And here I am, brave. I was too scared to ask someone because I kept thinking, who do you think you are? Why should they invest in you? Like, you're not that special. Like, who do you think you are? Anyway, I had this terrible reflux of shame and weirdness. How it started for me, though, there's this one guy that knew me, and he's still a supporter. He's a wonderful friend. And he saw how uncomfortable I was. And he said, "So you're raising support, right?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, how much do you need?" And I go, "I don't know." He said, "I'm going to give you $200 a month." Done. I'm like, okay. That was my first supporter. And then I'd have other people that would be like, "I'm going to support you." I'd be like, okay. I only asked one person to support me and it didn't go that well. She was my practice and it was ridiculous and I was so nervous, but she gave me like $50. But the point is that people would know me and they know how hard I'm working and they know what I'm doing and it's tax deductible. So there's all these nonprofits that instead of relying on the government to do all the work for everybody, there's nonprofits that are doing all this amazing work for the poor and that they ignored. And so people are like, "Yeah, you're working with the homeless women. I'm just going to pay you because that's tax deductible. And I know the money's going to go to getting them coffee and it's going to go to painting their nails and like sitting with them on the sidewalk because we know you're going to do the work." And so it was this kind of like gradual support that came in. And I was like, "Oh my God, I've got supporters." So I wrote this newsletter. And that same guy, my first supporter, he calls me, he goes, "Don't send me anything. I don't want to read about it. If you need me, just call me on the phone, but don't be sending me your newsletters." See, a lot of missionaries send out their newsletters, all the cool things they're doing. And I only had like 8 people. And he's like, "Yeah, don't send me anything." And then the other people didn't read it. So it's like, okay, so much that for that. But the fact is that I still run, my people. I've got this little group of people, and every now and then I'll get like a $5,000 donation anonymous, and I have no idea where it came from. And it often comes right when I'm thinking, I don't know, should I keep doing this? Am I doing good? Do people believe? And then like something happens, like a little vote of confidence, or even just a small amount. And it's not about the money so much; it's more about a group of people that support you and believe in you. And when you're down, you can call them on the phone and talk about it. Or when you have compassion fatigue, or when you have an exciting new idea, like there's people on your team. And I think that's one of the important things about purpose is it's not, as I said earlier, it's not a solo sport. We're meant to be in community with each other. Plus, my husband got a job and that helped pay the bills. Plus,
mm,
we live very simply.
mhm.
Like, we live simply. We live in a little tiny apartment in North Beach, and, I'm a really good cook now, and, I'm grateful for what I have, whereas 5 years ago, I would have been like, "Oh my god, this place is old and this and that." Now I'm like, "Oh my god, I get to live in the most beautiful city in the world, and all my needs are met."
Lovely. Thanks for sharing that. So, during your time before you started doing what you do now, were you a believer in some sort of religious institution?
Oh, well, I'll just explain briefly um, that I was raised Catholic,
Hmm.
and I was a Catholic up until like I was 40 or so. But I think this is really funny, and I think I would like to do a comedy routine about this, but I don't know who would laugh, so I could try it out on you. We were the unhappy Catholics because we killed Jesus. So my people were the sad people. We were always suffering and we were always sad. So faith was really a sad thing. And I know that's not fair to say because somebody might have been happy in our clan, but it wasn't like a joyful type of thing. And so I was always fixated on my unworthiness and my sin. But when I started to be, I'm 63. I'll be 64 in a couple weeks. But when I started to get to my 40s, I had kind of an awakening, and it was really strange. It was in the Catholic Church, and I started getting like a realization that God had been stalking me for 3,000 years and that he wanted to know me and wanted to be with me. And I was thinking, that's not what I was taught. I was taught he was unhappy. He was, I'd never make him happy. I never would be good enough. But this other image of God started happening and coming to me. And I was like, I started learning more about it and I started getting excited. And then I started being around people who had that same degree of excitement. They were older, but they were like really like they were secret God lovers. And I found them in the Catholic Church and they shepherded me and mentored me. And I was more and more amazed at what I was finding. And my heart started expanding. And so I ended up having to transition from the Catholic Church into a non denominational type Christian church because I married a man who was Christian but not Catholic, and I knew he wouldn't convert. So Catholicism is a beautiful religion, but it is very unique. And so, anyway, I started just getting to know more about God and praying more, but that heavy guilt that I always carried that was part of my family trappings, not part of the religion, but part of my family, started going away. And I started having more curiosity and more joy. But it wasn't a specific institution. It was more, I mean, it was Christian, but it was more like learning more and learning more and learning more and experiencing more. So the journey started with that, like I say, in my 40s, and then has just kind of intensified as I've gotten older. But the thing is, I know I said, made it sound like my people were all morbid and sad and all that stuff. But the fact is that I was thinking about it. We had people of faith in our lineage going all the way back. Like there were people who were devout in my mom's family and my parents and their family and their cousins. And I almost feel like there is something that burns in a person's heart, like we talked about earlier. And I feel like that will get expressed, that will come out. It'll come out in different ways, but it's almost like making room in one's life for that spirit side to come out. And I think that that's what connects us with each other. So I kind of see it breaking out of the realm of religion and breaking into the realm of community.
Very interesting. I like that. So, would you say that the previous religious upbringing didn't really encourage much internal exploration and discovery, and this new community encouraged that, and that is what is needed to, I guess, thrive as humans?
It could be, but I think it wasn't the religion itself. It was what happens when religion mixes with your family culture. Because other people didn't have that sad feeling. It was my people had that sad feeling. So when you mix, it's like there's two parts of the cocktail, right? So you mix your family story or your story with the faith story, it turns out to be something different. And so I think that I would probably still be able to enjoy the Catholic faith and the mysticism. And there's all sorts of levels, like anything you do, there's love. Like, for example, one thing about Catholicism, which I know there's bad things that have happened, but there's also social justice things that are happening around the world too. Like any religion you can look at, you can see terrible atrocities and you can also see brilliant social justice. So it's really a mixture, and there's not just one character of a religion. But I would say that the first part of my life was probably about dealing with wounding and sorting out who was at fault. Is it my parents? Is it me? Is it the institutions? Where did this car crash happen? But then over time, realizing that I'm not defined just by that narrative, that there's other parts of my narrative that are full of life. It's like a tree. There's a couple branches that kind of got decrepit, but there's other things that are shooting out fruit and shooting out life. And it's like, choose life. So I kind of feel like the journey is really about gravitating towards joy and gravitating towards life. And God is in that. So where it takes off and it's no longer in an institution, I think that's where we're ending up. That's where
Mm.
there's an invitation. I think the institutions, this is the epic of institutions failing us, right? But there's so much more. And it's really going to come down to people. I know that sounds corny, but people and God, people plus God.
So I want to ask you for some practical advice. For those people who are trying to figure out their purpose or might kind of know what it is, but aren't quite doing much to reach it yet, what insights and advice do you have for them?
Oh, that's great. Great questions. I think there's lots of things, but a couple things come to mind. And one is look at the people around you. Like pick your people and single out, look at who has life and who has joy. I'm not talking about following what they're doing. I'm talking about having them on your team. We all have friends that are like can't figure it out and are miserable, but like surround yourself also with people that have life and have joy because they will elevate you and they'll be like yeast that kind of keeps you lifted up. So that's one thing is choose your people. So when I moved from the hotel world, which is an awesome place to be, to this other band of people, those people, they were ride or die people, which I never did the expression ride or die. I think it's strange. But the point is, they were with me no matter what. When I screwed up, they were with me. They were my people. They were committed to walking through life with me. And they weren't my best friends. They were just people that shared my values. And I feel like that's important to be surrounded by people that share your values. I also think that get your healing, and that could be therapy. It could be it could be meditation, it could be a manual prayer, it could be joining a faith group, it could be reading the Bible and joining a faith group. It could be all sorts of different things. But if we don't get our healing, we can't fully show up. And I think most people have been, I'm not trying to be morbid here, but most people have been experienced trauma. Whether it's the loss of a parent, whether it's something catastrophic, whether it's violence. There's all sorts of trauma we've experienced. And I feel like as we get healed, we're able to achieve our purpose. Because when we're super broken and super wounded, it's really hard to be able to ascend. And even when you feel down or sad or scared, that doesn't mean you're screwed up. I think it's a matter of also loving yourself to know that when you're scared, it might be a sign to go for it. But that's where people come in that say, I believe in you, I see you. Because again, we're not meant to do this alone. And I think regarding finding our purpose, it's almost like you have to experience what it's not to find out what it is. So when the hotel world felt it wasn't the right fit, there's nothing wrong with the hotel world. But it was more like the more I experienced that, the more I knew that there was something else. And then as I moved towards something else, I had to go through sacrifices to try that out and to put up with the transition. It's like it is a journey. I mean, that sounds corny to say, but I don't know if I really had a purpose in my mind and in my heart for my life early. I don't think I did. I think it was just to get along and to get by and to be liked and to work and do functional work that was good, but I didn't have like a purpose. And I think that I kind of came late to the purpose party. And I feel like now my purpose is probably going to be very esoteric or very simplistic. It could either be one or the other. And it's like to love others well and to love God, which means love myself. So it's like this kind of love triangle. But I do believe that good work will come from that, no matter what I do. And I feel like if you have a good foundation, whatever you choose to do will come out of a good foundation. It's like good soil. It'll produce good fruit. And the good soil is that love soil.
Beautiful. That's amazing advice. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope so.
So you kind of touch upon this. So consider that there's a difference between inner purpose and outer purpose. Outer purpose being what you do externally, which we've discussed. And you kind of touch upon it. So, what would you say is your inner purpose, and where do you think it came from?
I think the inner purpose, this might be wrong, but almost feel like it relates to identity, right? So on the inside, who am I? And what is my narrative? What is my story? Because my purpose, my inner purpose comes out of who I am. So going back to the love thing, if I am secure and if I am loved and if I am approved of, even in my brokenness, then that gives me the inner strength to express things externally. But if my inner story or my identity is based on pain and based on bad things that happened to me and based on my mistakes, I'm going to not be able to have a purpose. I almost feel like that. I'm not sure. I haven't really given it much thought, but I should give it more. But I think that identity and what we tell ourselves about who we are will be what is reflected outwardly.
Hmm.
And how does a person have that identity? It's not the sum of our achievements. I know that. It's not the sum of our abilities. I know that. So it's not an external thing. So it has to come from something internal. And if we wanted to be philosophical, we could say that it comes from something intrinsic, which means it's part of who we are. So this kind of goes into remembering talking about the women in the tenderloin. Do they have intrinsic value just because they are? Or do they have less value because of what they don't earn and how they look? And I just feel like it's philosophically, does every person have value? And therefore I have value. Is it an intrinsic thing that I have as an image bearer of God, as a daughter? Is it something that I possess just by being me, not based on what I do? And I think that has been hard for me to accept. But the more I move into that, the more peace I have and the more I'm able to accomplish. So it's almost like an inverse relationship.
Mm.
I don't even know how to put it in words better than that. So I'm probably going to just have to leave it at that.
Okay, yeah, no, that I think that was a great answer actually. Um, they also say that in order to know your purpose, you have to know yourself, right? At what
Mhm.
point did you really feel like you know yourself? Or maybe you don't know yourself. So.
No, it kind of goes back to that why I was so excited when I was talking about Emmanuel prayer
Hmm.
and why I was like, oh my God, everyone's got to do this. It's the best thing ever. Right. Because I feel like I wonder if we know ourselves in relationship to God. I almost feel like that relationship may be the most important key as to who we are. So when I have this prayer technique and I pray, because I coach people, but I'm also coached. And when I see that I'm loved and I see that he doesn't reject me and that he's not appalled by me and he thinks I'm funny and he knows that I love cats and he wants to hang out with me, it builds up who I am and my self-love. And I feel like that's how I've learned to know myself more. Partly it's in relationship to other people, not just God. So I have a husband and I'm happily married, but part of who I am is in relationship to him. Do I serve him? Am I kind? Am I forgiving? When we have an argument, am I going to be mean? Am I going to cool off for a couple days and then have a reasonable conversation? It's like who am I to my sister? Am I going to come and help her and take care of her when she needs help? It's like I feel like on one hand, it's not the external, but there is a relational aspect of who we are. And I'm not even sure we could be who we really are if we were completely without relationship. I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah, that's a tough question. One last practical advice question. So, for those who are looking to step out of their comfort zone, their unfulfilling corporate job, towards something more meaningful and in tune with their purpose, what steps should they take to get there?
All right. So first of all, corporate jobs can be very fulfilling.
Hmm.
And if you think about San Francisco and the startup universe here, I guess you wouldn't call those corporate jobs, maybe you'd call them startup jobs, but
Hmm.
jobs with a purpose and a common vision and a common mission. It's like it doesn't mean that the type of work is bad if you're working with an organization that has a bigger purpose that's shared. And I'm trying to say that I mean, I talked to this young guy, wonderful guy, and he was working in medical equipment sales. And he was saying, it was kind of soul sucking and all of that. And I said, you got to believe that there's a company that does what your company does, but it does it for good purposes. Like, how different would it be to find an organization that is on fire and doing good work? So it's not just leaving industry, it's more like finding your people. I'm kind of going back to that. Um, but if a person really had a secret goal or a burning desire to do something different than what they're doing, I feel like, I'm a practical person. You wouldn't know that, but I would definitely do research about who's doing it. Just like I met those two women. And I was like, tell me about you. How did you come into this? What are you afraid of? What do you need? How can I help you? And I feel like that's one thing when we are looking at making transitions is to find a people and then ask them those questions. Tell me about your values. Tell me about your story, just like you're doing. And getting people to share to be able to see, is there a match here? Or is there a collaborative, is there a synergy here? So I don't think it's all or nothing. I do think that transition can happen with surrounding yourself with people that share your values and looking for companies that might share your values or nonprofits that share your values. But if you don't have a clear picture, like if there feels like there's an empty hole, I don't know what I want to do, I don't know what my purpose is, I would say, corny, don't be hard on yourself and don't beat yourself up because purpose comes from experimenting and finding out what it's not sometimes to find out what it is. And even talking to other people. How do you see me? What do you think my strengths are? What do you think my gifts are? And then keep doing things that give you joy. Like I know that you're a painter, and you have a job, but you also have creative pursuits. You're a creative. So it's like the more you do your gifting, the more ideas you'll have and the more resources you'll have and the more you'll attract people that have that spark as well. So I have hope for people looking to make that transition. But I also feel don't beat yourself up. Find good people in a good culture and do some research, but also stay with things that give you joy while you're thinking about your transition. How does
Mm,
that sound?
that's fantastic. Amazing insight.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move on to the last part. It's the lightning round. Where I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions. You can just answer with one word or a sentence.
Okay.
Yeah, you ready?
Okay.
What's one thing you like to do to relax?
Go for a walk.
What's one thing you like to do for fun?
Drink wine and watch British baking shows.
What's one habit that you always make sure to do each day?
Pray.
What's one habit you would like to work on?
Exercise.
If you're not doing what you are doing today, what would you be doing?
Living in a community.
Mm. And what is your ideal life?
Oh my gosh. I think I have it.
Yeah.
Except, yeah, I was going to say having 200 friends and having 200 friends that are excited about life and being able to really be who I am and show up. I know that's not one word. And living in a beautiful place really does make a difference, I have to admit. I know there's other beautiful places, but there's something about beauty that our souls respond to.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm off topic. Sorry.
Yeah. How do you define purpose?
Feeling released to be who you are in this world. It's almost like permission to be yourself and engage fully with this world.
Mm, yeah, it's a good definition. And lastly, what requests would you like our listeners to do?
I think explore the health of their soul and to have hope that they're continuing to grow and to have grow closer to joy. So let me think about how to rephrase that. It's hard to put in words, but it has to do with believing that they matter and believing that they're on a journey that is good and that there can be joy and even more joy for them in this life.
Yeah, that's a great request. Thank you for putting that out there. Well, that is our episode of A Working Purpose. Thank you so much, Malia, for joining us for and sharing all your insightful stories and sharing your story. This has been
Mm,
very inspiring for me personally, so I hope it inspires others.
thank you, Wing. I love being with you, and I'm really proud of what you're doing here too.
Thank you. So, the key takeaways from this episode is that you need to try many new things to figure out what your purpose is not, to find out what your purpose is. To strive to take actions and join a community that shares your values so they can support you in your working purpose. Don't compartmentalize a deep spiritual aspect of you, if that is a part of you. Let it resonate through in every aspect of your life so you can truly live and embody your purpose. And for Malia, that is sharing love and hope, especially to those that are shunned by society. And the biggest key takeaway of all is that it is never too late to find and live your purpose. This interview with Malia definitely inspired me with lots of wisdom and practical advice on how to ignite and reach my purpose. And it also broadened my conception of Christianity and gave me a new appreciation for this aspect of Christian spirituality that is not dogma based. I hope Malia's story inspired you to find your purpose too. If you'd like to hear more and to support this podcast, please subscribe, tell your friends about it, rate it 5 stars, or even recommend some awesome guests to me by visiting aworkinpurpose.com. Please also follow A Working Purpose on Instagram and join a community on Facebook where we can spark discussions and support one another in our progress towards our purpose. You have my greatest gratitude for listening. May your present moment, now and forever, be filled with light and love. Until next time, this is Wing, and you are listening to A Work in Purpose.